Thanks for joining us on the show.
Oh, pleasure's mine, James.
Todd, we have had the pleasure of meeting each other only about a month ago, and I think we've become pretty good friends.
Besties.
Quite quickly. Thank you, mate. I appreciate that. Now, we're going to talk all about airplanes today, which I'm really excited about, everything aviation. You are the guy that I think I've been told by many people, if Todd doesn't know it, in aviation, no one does. So we'll test that a little bit over our conversation. Tell me, Leading Edge is the name of the consultancy firm that you started after. Now we're going to start here, and then I'm going to get you to go back 30 years. But you are running an organisation right now called Leading Edge Consulting. Management consulting. Where's that name come from?
Leading edge in common society means at the forefront of, or breaking through, I guess. But for people that are actually in the aviation industry, and indeed my consultancy actually is aviation focused. The word leading edge also means it is actually the front part of an aircraft wing. So the aircraft has got a wing, ailerons, it's got a fuselage, it's got a fin, it's got a horizontal stabilizer. But anybody would know that the front part of every wing on every aircraft is called the leading edge. If I meet people that are actually in aviation, always I just go, oh, cool name, man. And I'm very proud of it, actually. I'm very proud of the name.
So let's do this. Let's go right back to where it started for you. How did you get interested in airplanes, aviation, everything that goes up in the air? What's your story? Where's that start?
At a DNA level for me, I must admit. I think there's 30 years ago, and I actually maintain in the sense I always think of there's sort of three groups of people. There's those groups of people that have no aviation DNA in their bloodstream. And frankly, oddly enough, my kids are like that. They've had every opportunity to express an aviation interest, and they just don't. And that doesn't stop me loving them at all. But it's so obvious that if anyone's going to flourish, it would be them, and they haven't. You've got other people, ironically, that actually will join the aviation industry because they've got transferable skills. Good examples, they might be lawyers and they move into the legal department. They might be in HR, finance, etc. All those departments in aviation that exist behind the scenes that the public don't see, it's still a business. And so those business functions are still run by people with those sort of job titles. But you see those people that join the industry, and all of a sudden a large proportion of them just light up, and they become addicted with that sense of purpose, the energy of aviation, which is frankly intoxicating and very addictive. You see they actually have a latent aviation gene in them that once they're exposed to it, they actually go on to build very fulfilling careers in aviation, and they don't leave aviation. They choose to stay because they love it as much as I do. And I love those people, the ones that are in a sense the adopted ones. But then you have people like me, and my wife thinks I'm a total nerd and a tragic, to be honest. The reality is I actually know thousands of people just like me. And we're the people that since we were little kids, we'd look up overhead at an aeroplane flying over. You'd go to every air show that you could. When I grew up in the 70s and 80s, if there was a movie on the TV, such as the Dam Busters or whatever, Battle of Britain, you'd be looking all forward, or you'd see it in the TV guide, and you'd be waiting all week to watch it on Saturday night, right? And every opportunity, you flew model aeroplanes, you built plastic kits when you're little, you flew flyable ones when you're a teenager. Every expression you had to show your interest in the aviation was evidenced, and that is what I'm like, and I'm not unique, I'm not special. In fact, I just talked to a guy today about this. Actually, somebody introduced me to a young bloke who's passionate about aviation. He's got the gene, and this guy is grappling with being an engineer or being a pilot. And I was just, I don't know that his name's Zach. I don't know him. He's down there in Adelaide. Somebody asked me to give him a call, so I just gave him a call and just shared my career life experience. But my one was that I had this sort of latent the gene, but I didn't realise for a long period of time that I could actually work in aviation. I just didn't have this connection in me. So I spent the first 10 years after I left school, I had a gap decade, I always describe it, where I did all sorts of jobs that you don't require a qualification for, but you work very hard. I was a landscape labourer, a builder's labourer, a brickies labourer, painter's labourer, plumber's labourer, worked with street kids for a couple of years, worked on boats in Sydney Harbour, picked fruit for 3 seasons, removed asbestos. It was a wonderful time, but I learnt a tremendous amount in that. I learnt one of the things I actually pride myself on is that I have the ability just to talk at any level within the organisation, whether it's senior management, which is obviously I've worked in the management level for a long time, but being able to just walk out to any person in the industry and just genuinely engage with them in such a way that they just feel like I'm not some sort of corporate wanker. I do pride myself on that, and I think those years, that gap decade, just gave me the ability just to be able to just talk to anyone, and it has actually really been a useful skill. I remember it really clearly. I was just about to get married, and I was landscaping at the time, and I was literally digging a trench in Mossman on the lower north shore of Sydney. And from Mossman, you can actually see the aircraft landing into Sydney when they're flying, when they're landing on runway 16. And I was just digging. I remember, it's like one of those moments that's just crystallized in your head. And looking up, and I was watching the aircraft going over. Next one to go over, it's a couple of minutes later. And all of a sudden, just pause and go, why the hell aren't I involved with that? I thought, it's my passion. It's reflected back on everything that I'm interested in. Go, I should be doing something in aviation. Slow learner, right? It took me 10 years to really figure that out. I don't know what it was, but it was just a maturity thing in your brain. So, and one of the things that I talk to this young guy, Zach, about today is that for those that are on the outside of the industry, but are passionate about the industry and want to be part of it, like I was then, in a way, it's very easy to think there's kind of just three roles, because these are the roles you see. You see the pilots, you see the cabin crew, and then you see the people that work in the airport. So either the customer service people, or when you look out the window of the airplane, you see the guys on the ramp, right? And you kind of think, they're the three roles that are in aviation. Which of those three roles do I want to be, right? Was my thinking back then. And I thought, I want to be a pilot. So I actually enrolled in a diploma of aeronautics and absolutely loved every second of that. It was to the point I was so obsessively enthusiastic. But concurrently with the diploma, I was also doing flying training. So I actually went through to commercial, and I had this instructor. Around about 2/3 of the way through that journey, I had an instructor who I can't even remember their name, but I remember what they said. He said, I actually think you'll make a very frustrated airline pilot. And I thought, oh, what does that mean? I wonder what he meant. I thought about it, and I continued to fly. And at this stage, I was doing more and more solo flying, just getting my hours up, right? And those words never left me. And what really he was identifying was that the role of a pilot is, I guess it's like maybe a classical musician that is a master on a particular instrument. And the discipline of working within the constraints of the music score and actually practicing that level of excellence within the constraints of what is defined as good music is what a pilot is to do. And the pilot's life is around driving the aircraft with those levels of professionalism and excellence from A to B and B back to A, etc. Working in a two-crew environment where you are not necessarily surrounded by lots of people, but you're surrounded by a small number of people for long periods of time. And as somebody who enjoys a sense of liberty in their career and the ability to create and drive change, the ability as a card-carrying extrovert, the absolute yearning every day to be meeting new people and energizing off being surrounded by people and enjoying learning about people. The idea of being in a cockpit and driving excellence through the constraints of very defined standard operating procedures and conforming extraordinarily with great precision, it was not my DNA. And the instructor had identified that, and I'm extremely grateful. And what I actually want to speak to this kid, Zach, about this morning, ironically, who had expressed an interest to me, maybe I want to be a pilot. I said, well, I'm not saying not, but let me just tell you my story, because one of the things I would do before I spend, in his case, in 2026, potentially $100,000 on flying lessons, is actually understand if you got the DNA that is actually going to make you enjoy the constraints of being a pilot and loving those boundaries and driving excellence within those, within the, like a professional musician would, within that sort of environment. Or if you're not like that, well, let me draw your attention to the myriad of other roles that exist behind the scenes in aviation, where I've actually derived a wonderfully rich and blessed career, being my best self in the freedom that I've been able to find in the ability to define and drive my own career outcomes.
What was that turning point? So you have this aha moment, you have this person that says something to you that really, like you said, is a pretty profound turning point for you in your life. And then so you're like, well, if I'm not going to be at the front of the plane, how am I still going to be involved and what am I going to do? So what opportunities opened up after that?
We're going back to the mid-90s now, right? 96. I did a stint with Ansett, just on a fixed-term contract basis. So I did that.
So when you say a stint with them, piloting? Like
no. Funny enough, in their flight operations department, but an entry-level role, just whatever you could take, just to get some experience. Right? Sorry, not flying.
No,
cool. I never flew commercially, never earned $1. One of the jobs that I'd been looking for came up in the paper, and it was with Hazelton Airlines. Hazelton Airlines was a little New South Wales-based regional airline, flew sub 340s. And I cannot tell you the sense of pride and joy I had working for Hazelton Airlines as my first career break in the industry. Honestly, if Hazelton Airlines needed a kidney, I would have given mine.
Wow.
I was just, and to be honest with you, the people that work at Hazos, as we call it, have a special sort of connection, and it was a wonderful place with a wonderful culture, a massive underdog airline. And so they gave me my first break, and I worked there for 2 years.
Great. Now that was in operations. I guess
So operations is a big word in aviation,
right? Of course, right.
And so I always like to think about aviation as having 4 big operational departments. You can call them legs on a chair. I call them, personally, make it a bit fun, I call them the great tribes, right? You've got the flight operations tribe, which is obviously, the job title might be the head of flying operations or chief pilot, and that individual's workforce, which ultimately is a range of technical administrative people that basically keep the pilot group safe, controlled, trained, at adequate numbers recruited to the right numbers, resource numbers are right, etc. All that's flight operations. Cabin crew does that, but with the flight attendants. You have your engineers, which in America they would call them mechanics, but we call them engineers in Australia. And they actually maintain the health of the fleet, both through administrative controls and the mass amount of paperwork in order to diligently care for the compliant maintenance of the aircraft, either proactively or reactively when they break down. And of course, the individuals that are out there in the hangars and the tarmacs around the network that actually fix the airplanes, either the electronics on the airplanes, which are called avionics, or the mechanical side of the aircraft. And so that's engineering, generically called engineering. And then the fourth of the great tribes, and I call them the great tribes because this is where numerically most of the people that work in your airline collectively are, and they are all operational. But the fourth one is airports.
Okay.
And airports is a combination of your customer service guys, which are generically called above the wing people, and then you've got your guys and girls that work out there on the ramp, which either manage the bags underneath the terminal, load the bags into the aircraft, push the aircraft back, offload freight, do the toilet drops, etc. for the aircraft. That is, those guys are called below the wing, but collectively, they're airports. My career has been within those 4 great tribes and those 2 ancillary groups in different leadership roles. Funnily enough, of my time of 25 years in airlines and 5 years running in the consultancy, but most of my time actually has been spent in flight operations of those tribes.
Okay.
So although I was not flying, but using my skills in non-flying roles, supporting the pilot group.
So your career grew from 30 years ago from learning fly. You've been involved around these 4 tribes, as you talk about, in operations 5 years ago, roughly 5 years ago, around COVID, is the time that you felt the timing was right to actually step outside of being in the space and helping from the outside. What was the key responsibility you held before you officially finished up and then went into your own management consultancy group? Your title at the time, was that head of operations for Qantas?
Yeah, I was one of a small group of people that was, I was blessed enough not to be stood down during COVID.
Okay.
I didn't miss a day. I don't take that lightly, and there's possibly people listening to this podcast that had to stand down, some of them dramatically, in other words, 100% stood down. And for those people, my heart genuinely always has gone and continues to go out to them. I was blessed. At the time, I was managing anything that moved, I was a part of, and I was also had a significant safety responsibility. And COVID really played in on that safety responsibility, because we were managing all the biological risks that are associated with COVID in order to do the minuscule amount of flying that Qantas was still doing at the time. We were doing repatriation flights. We're flying in P2 masks in freighters. We're looking at converting passenger aircraft to freighters because the demand for freight was so high. All of those activities I was involved with, so I was frankly incredibly busy despite going to the office. If I went to the office, it was a ghost town.
Right, of course.
Yeah. But yeah, so in the back end of that, as COVID started to blow over, and it's really weird. I actually still have to. I still pinch myself sometimes, because there is no family history of business ownership or entrepreneurship in my family, and so there wouldn't have been a time that I would have ever considered or had a yearning to start my own business. And that's one of the things actually I admire in entrepreneurs like yourself. Actually, I go, guys, I love that DNA. It's amazing. I really would love to bottle it and actually. Transfuse it into me. But all I can say is that I just saw the opportunity to take a career change. My wife and I would describe it as we entered the second prime of our life. Kids are at the end of high school. The son had left. The daughter was in her last 6 months when I started the business. The mortgage, you've broken the back of the mortgage, so you're not enslaved to the mortgage anymore. And you kind of go, actually, I can make career decisions because I can be a little bit more adventurous, or I can take a risk. What's the worst case scenario? Well, the kids don't have to come out of school. Any fallout like that, I would probably just go back and just find another job. Okay, yeah. Well, why don't I choose a life of adventure rather than just sort of staying within the same rails until I retire? And I think for a lot of people, I saw COVID was a driver of change for a lot of people. And I was one of them. And I was blessed, I guess, that my change was by choice. A lot of other people had change thrust upon them. But to be honest with you, it's rare to find somebody that even had the change thrust upon them that actually said, I wish I hadn't had that change thrust upon me.
Right. Before COVID, when things, let's just say they were still normal, right at that point, right up even before COVID started, as head of operations, how many people were you ultimately leading and responsible for under your purview of what that meant as operations for those groups of people?
Yeah.
How big was that?
The head of operations job title was one where it was actually you're responsible for the concept of operations rather than the people. That was in the middle of COVID.
Right, okay.
Probably the biggest leadership role people-wise that I did was head of airports for Jetstar. I went down there, and the workforce that I was leading there, I had 1,000 people that were employees within the airport. The airports that we operated in, where we had our own employees, and then we had a range of secondary airports, both onshore in Australia, plus a range of airports offshore. There's 39 airports all up when I was there, and we probably had around about 2,000 people that were there as contractors working for ground handling companies that we contracted through to Jetstar for their services.
What do you think the glue was? What made your job successful? And I'm sure not every day it was, but ultimately, how did you pull everyone together to get done what needed to be done over those 18 months?
One of the things I find that I'm good at is creating energy in others. And if I can create energy with purpose, which, by the way, when it comes to aviation isn't hard. I am able to actually align a large group of people that are arguably outside of my immediate visibility. So as a senior leader, one works in an office, but in the Jetstar example, I had 39 airports, and the people that worked in the office, there's probably about 25 of us. And so that left several thousand that were not in my immediate contact. But if I can create enough energy with purpose through my immediate team, and then they will then carry that out to the greater teams that are out there in the outside world. It doesn't happen overnight, but eventually you get that alignment of all the people towards what you want them to be aligned for. That is the purpose. I found for me that was a very effective way, just with sheer bloody-minded enthusiasm for what is right. And what is right in aviation is not that mysterious, or it's not even a secret. What is right in aviation is, frankly, the corporate values, the values that the corporate values, I actually wouldn't use that word, the values of the organisation that you're working for. So they're right, because if you don't believe they're right, you should not be working for that organisation, right? So I just expect everybody to be living according to the values because I'm doing it. And those values translate to things such as, when you get out there into the field, making the right decision when nobody is watching to be safe, looking after your mate and caring for your mate, caring for the customer and doing the right thing for the customer, not taking shortcuts on the standard operating procedures, but doing work properly, caring for the equipment, caring for the aircraft. I could go on, but it's fairly clearly. You don't need to be trained to understand what is right in aviation. The way you maybe bring what is right to aviation with the procedures, yeah, we'll train you on the procedures. You kind of know what the purpose of those procedures is without having to be told. So living that sense of energy with that purpose, with bold-faced and, to be honest with you, unembarrassed enthusiasm. One of the other virtues I have is that I'm extremely hard to embarrass. My wife thinks that's an abject failure. I think it's a strength, but my kids actually think it's a failure as well. But I actually am really hard to embarrass. So I'm just quite happy to just be almost embarrassingly enthusiastic about what is right, and that passion is infectious.
Has that lack of embarrassment actually assisted you in your own self-awareness, your own personal growth, knowing that actually I'm pretty thick-skinned, I can take what's coming to me? Have you felt that that's been of benefit for you? Has that been a gift, in other words?
I pride myself on deep reflection and the ability to learn from those mistakes. It's actually one of those ones where I'm flip my brain to actually say, what if somebody actually provides the observation, feedback is a gift. I had an HR manager once say that to me, and I thought, man, that's a good saying. When somebody's giving me some tough news about something that I've done, they're actually giving me a gift. Man, thank you. And all of a sudden, that's a way to, I'm not embarrassed, actually. I'm proud of the fact I've stuffed up. No one's been hurt, but I've got the insight and I can correct it. What a great story that is. So let's just put one example. But I'm the first to admit I've made tons of mistakes and learned a hell of a lot. And the older I get, ironically, the more fallible I realize I am. When you're young and you think, I'm the world's greatest junior manager or world's greatest manager, or whatever role I'm doing is, the older you get, you go, geez, I've got a lot to learn. And it's funny, isn't it? The more you do learn, and ironically, one would say the wiser you're probably becoming, the more you realize the gap between you and what collective amazing probably is.
Wow. Yeah, I've always talked about, once I was 25, I was actually at the pinnacle of my career because I knew everything. Yeah. I had nothing else to learn. I was right about everything. It's just that that started to fall apart after that. Just circling back to the point that you made before around the values and people understanding the values, and that being a way that hopefully goes from you to your direct team, from the direct team to the rest of the organisation, and hopefully too culturally at the highest level, those values are being drummed into people. And like you said, if they don't agree with the values and if they don't know, they shouldn't be there. And I think that's a really great saying. Do you think when things have not worked to plan, can you point back to it actually being the result of values not being followed? I mean, you talked about all the things that they translate to as far as caring for equipment and for people and for each other. Is it pretty then easy to identify that actually when things have gone wrong, it really points back to that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the answer is no.
All right.
Aviation, I remember a great quote, and I'm going to misquote this quote actually, but I remember Warren Buffett saying that if he'd been there when the Wright brothers were flying in Kitty Hawk in 1903, if he'd had a gun, he would have shot them out of the sky, because there's no way in God's wide world anyone should be investing in aviation. Aviation is a remarkably vulnerable industry. It's absolutely an essential part of our global economy. It's not going away, but it is a devil of a way to make money. And it is, and the reason it is it's so vulnerable to external shocks. Right now in March of 2026, we're talking about the cost of fuel and what it's going to mean for aviation. We were just coming out of the back into COVID with supply chain constraints, which meant that your ability to support aircraft with the spare parts supply chains were highly constrained. Aviation is surrounded by the regulatory rigor that actually allows it to be extraordinarily safe, despite what you're actually doing with an aeroplane every day with monotonous regularity, putting it in the sky at 3/4 of the speed of sound, at higher than Everest, and you'll be sleeping, using your laptop, sipping a glass of wine, completely oblivious to what you're actually performing in that, what the aircraft is performing with you inside it. The ability for the organisations around that, with the vulnerability to those external shocks, to sustain that is extraordinary. So coming back to your question about values, when the values aren't held, that's where things go wrong. Generally in aviation, when things have gone wrong, it is because there has been something that has affected the organisation that is not necessarily as a result of the values breaking down. It's a fuel spike. It's an aircraft broken down. It's a cyclone bearing down on the northern part of Australia. It's a customer who has a heart attack and the aircraft has to divert. I could go on. They're only limited by our imagination and time. But the values allow the organisation to have an aligned response to try and get that, and therefore resilience, in order to recover the aberration and get the network back under schedule until the next shock.
So there is something comforting about when I get onto an aeroplane, I look out the window and I see everything that's going on. Like for me, and maybe other people have different views on this, but I'm always looking out going, hey, look, everyone's pretty busy. Sometimes maybe some people are sitting around because they've actually got a specific job that it's not time for them to do it. They're waiting for the aircraft to be at a certain point, are they refueling or whatever? To me, it looks amazing. Like I look out there and I just go, everybody knows their job. There's a lot happening. And I think we do take it for granted as passengers. Just pay for our ticket, get on, and hoping that the meal doesn't taste awful that we've got on the flight. There is so much happening. So when you're in that space and when you are responsible for overseeing so much of that, I want to know, when is a day that you feel that you can think back to, that you go, that is a day I do not want to repeat again?
Before I give you a couple of those stories, though, you actually started to trigger in me something that I get so passionate about, I almost get teary, though. And I talked about it before when I talked about the groups of people that some of them don't have the DNA. You've got the people that have the DNA somewhere inside them that they don't realise until they start in the airline, and then they find, oh wow, this is fantastic. And then you've got people like me. For those last two groups, I think part of the intoxication of the industry, right? I'm yet to encounter another industry that is like this. I can meet somebody in Papua New Guinea who is equally passionate about aviation, that I have an immediate connection. If they're in the airline up there, I can just talk to them. It drives my family crazy because So you'll find each other at barbecues and you'll just start to talk shop, right? But you just have this incredible interest in, these YouTube channels that feed this curiosity and this passion, the intoxication, right? But the intoxication is based on, I touched on this just a little earlier, there is something magical about what we do as an industry. When you actually think about as you just said, mate, the complexity of the 4 tribes coming together, which is a combination of actually a whole lot of departments within those tribes. And some of those tribes are actually contractors, some of those are employees of the airline, that all come around to get one aircraft into the sky. It's incredible if you actually want to trace that one event of the one aircraft getting to airborne back, the amount of training just the pilots alone have had, the cabin crew alone, the engineers alone, in a way, years worth of training just for this one event of this one departure. The traceability of all the spare parts that is in the aircraft, you'd probably be able to find the actual mine where the aluminium was mined from that has gone in, because there is absolute incredible precision on the traceability and the regulatory controls that go around everything in the aircraft manufacturing and subsequent maintenance by the manufacturer and the engineering department within the airline. Even the guys that are just out there loading bags are doing it to kilo level precision. The right hold, the right amount of bags, the right kilo. Everything is exacting. The fuel, the traceability on the fuel is exquisite. Everything that goes in, as you said, is just incredible. This orchestra of all these different people. And then you get in the airplane with absolute, what's the word? Almost, if your meal is a little bit off, you're furious because you've taken everything else for granted.
Complete naivety.
I actually worked in the Qantas catering department for a while. I was gobsmacked to find out in the IT system that supported the catering department alone, there was 20,000 different asset items that were listed in there. Whether a sachet of salt is an item, the range of different cups that Qantas had for the different cabins on different international and domestic airlines, they alone were hundreds of different asset items. The complexity of just getting that meal to you, sir, is extraordinary. What's behind the scenes every single day, all of us relate to. You never stop finding stuff out that you didn't know. Every day you have a bloody hell, I did not know that moment. I'm not kidding you. And it's fantastic for someone who's actually instinctively curious. It's like, wow. It's like, yeah, you're always discovering stuff. This is incredible. Now, the thing is, that aircraft that we've just described that has departed and you're having your meal in the sky and then you're going to watch a movie and fall asleep and, then wake up comfortably at the top of descent. The flight attendant tells you to put your seat back up and get ready for the landing. The reality is that incredible complexity just to get your one airplane flying is happening concurrently at all these other airports around the world. And when your airplane lands at the next destination, another group of people with a similar level of orchestrated cohesion, again, all in a sense strangers to the pilots and flight attendants that actually have now flown in there, they need to come together to get that aircraft off to its next destination. And somehow there's a group of people that are actually stitching all this network together to try and sell it to people in order to make a buck. And so the incredible complexity of how you actually do that when there is no single orchestra, so no single conductor over this global orchestra, is incredible. There are international organisations, IATA and ICAO, but they don't actually have some sort of almost a communist level of control over the entire global schedule of airlines. It is largely, frankly, the flight schedules are largely deregulated. And so the ability for all these airlines to come together globally and network around between airports, airlines, and carrying the customers, matching supply with demand, is just nothing short of incredible. And I actually thought a lot about it because that complexity and how you actually pull it off every day is why it's so intoxicating for those that work in it and so interesting for those that are interested in it, but maybe through watching YouTube channels or talking to people like me at barbecue, because everybody's interested. You still get hundreds of thousands of people turning up to an air show. And, what are we now? 123 years since the Wright brothers flew, right? And it's just intrinsically fascinating. And I think the thing that, how does that complexity, how does it keep going? How does it actually even make a buck? How do you solve that and make a buck? Is just incredible. And I think the complexity is actually governed in a way. There's no single orchestra conductor, but everything really is driven around the clock. So the clock is the thing that defines the network schedule, when things arrive and take off, how you fit a constrained amount of aircraft into an airport without having too many airplanes on the ground at the wrong time, etc. Obviously, the clock is then when things get disrupted, the clock is then what drives you back to what is now the normal cadence of operation. So the clock is actually what defines, it's like the global language that we have in common around when things occur. Even the clock is going to define maintenance schedules for when aircraft is fixed. Yeah, it's going to define the amount of time that a pilot or a flight attendant, duty time limitations is driven by the clock in order to manage fatigue. The clock actually has a huge amount of this silent participation in being the conductor of the industry. The next one is there is economic drivers. So people do get into the industry and people start airlines with a desire to make a buck, and it's a bloody hard way to do it. But people there is a desire, like Richard Branson when he started, Virgin Airlines and Virgin Atlantic in the UK, he was attracted to it. He probably had the gene, right? And he wanted to have a crack. So he started an airline because he believed he could make a buck out of it. And frankly, Richard Branson did. So, and other people do too. So there is this degree of people wanting to make a buck in it because they see that there's a gap in the market, or there's a way to actually grow the market if it's already had the gap filled. But the final bit, so you got the clock, you got the economic drivers, because people are obviously not doing it for charity. The final bit, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, the final bit is, I think, that keeps the industry going is actually passion. It's this energy that people have, whether I know cabin cleaners, people that actually get on the airplane for 11 minutes, they clean everything, wipe down the tray tables, vacuum the floor, cross the seat belts, take the bins out, wipe down the bathroom, daytime turnaround, Qantas 737, 11 minutes is the time that's available to clean the aircraft, right? A little squad of people get in one of these vehicles that you see outside the aircraft, and they get on board. One of the guys I know there, wonderful guy, he's so passionate about the industry, he used to keep a logbook of every airplane that he flew and the registration of the aircraft, right? So that is the sort of energy that I'm talking about, right? So he chooses to work at the airport and clean airplanes because he wants to be a part of it. And so he actually is a great little, Lockie's his name, he is a great little example of, I think, just an individual who represents the energy that people have in their different roles in this orchestra. People share that common energy for the industry. People don't work in it because it's another job. They work in it because, I love aviation.
I already regret my question, because now I feel bad that I've gone and asked you for some dirt to say, come on, tell me about, no. And I mean this genuinely. I know you're like me. You take a long time to answer a question without answering the question, but I'm really glad you did, because you answered it in a profoundly different way than I was expecting, but I'm really glad that you did, because you've highlighted something that is, I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, but if I hear what you're saying, that it actually gives me hope about humanity. Okay. And my question was coming from the fact that I can sometimes be a pissed off, customer, that things don't go my way. My plane's delayed. It's late. I couldn't get through to anyone to help me. Poor me. Not caring that millions of other people are also affected as other passengers, and also not caring about the stress that is caused by everyone else, probably because of something that is out of most people's control to start with. But we like to complain. I'm the first one. There's this part of everybody, I think, that somehow loves planes, it's the miracle of this giant heavy thing being in the sky. We all dream, we all dream of flying. I think there's like 2 out of 3 of us in the world would have some, if not more, have this fascination. Like you said, sky shows, air shows, they sell out all the time. Right near our office in Wisconsin is the Oshkosh air show in the United States. I think one of the largest in the world. You've got Farnborough in the UK, and these things are major spectacles, and they're incredible to watch. You some weird feeling inside of you. And these are the people that don't even have the gene that you're talking about. And so where you talk about this community all over the world where you almost become instant friends, it's not even pilot to pilot. It could be cleaner to pilot. It could be engineer to air host. But how wonderful that is, that still exists, that there is no big boss telling everyone what to do. That, like you said, you leave one airport, you land in a different country, in a different language, but still working to the same standards, but just have people really coming to work every day, at least the majority, with a feeling of sense of purpose, with that passion to go, I'm going to get this, I'm going to make sure that this plane goes off on time. I'm going to do my little bit to make sure this plane leaves on time, that customers ultimately are satisfied. And I'm sure that there are the individuals that is not the case for. That is always going to be it. You might see someone's a bit grumpy or they're having a bad day. Name an industry where they're not. But man, I hope what you're saying is true. And I'm not doubting you. It's actually, it's invigorating for me knowing where we are in this such divisive time in our world and our life, where we're just so divided by opinions and thoughts and whatever it might be. To know that there is there's still, and not still, but there is a group of people. It's like humans are still good at their core here. We're all wanting something good for others. Yeah. And to know that that's the DNA that's driving the success within the aviation industry, man, it really encourages me. That gives me hope.
There's something wholesome about the people actually, I think, enjoy being part of something that's bigger than themselves. And it's the magic of the industry, and they just feel that they're somehow participating in something that is so intrinsically interesting. It's just intoxicating to be part of that. And I think even those people who you do maybe meet, and I apologize on behalf of them, because I'm sure they regret occasionally getting frustrated when they're worn down after possibly days of disruption in some situations where the poor old airport person is just absolutely shredded with the disruption as much as the customer.
Right.
And I apologize for them, but I also, my heart goes out to them as well. But I can tell you right now, they're not quitting, right? Those individuals are going, oh, this job's just too hard for me. You don't meet people like that. They keep on coming back. There is something about those people in those roles that I guess I would ask that the travelling public be really kind to them, because they put themselves out there every day to support you. And sure, they're not perfect. They're human. They get tired. They actually do occasionally lose their temper as well. But yeah, just be mindful. They don't come to work to do a bad job, and they haven't caused the thing that you're dealing with. They're part of it too.
This is really challenging for me with even my own company and the team that we have around the world, is that I want to know that they come to work loving what they do. I can't force that.
Yeah.
I can't, obviously I can't dictate that. I can do everything I hope I can do by creating or help contribute to supporting, encouraging, dynamic, vibrant, rewarding culture. But I can't force that. And I also can't apologize for, or at least be responsible for, when we get hit, right? And it's interesting you use the analogy for the rugby field. It's like some days I just come home and I'm really stressed about, like, man, there's just so much going on. I'm not really sure how to do this. And so, but I signed up for this. Like, it's like, don't walk on the field if you don't want to get your head beaten in. Like, that's the game I've chosen and I love it. I've just got to be reminded of that. But even with my team, is that I really hope that if they're not passionate about it, if they don't love what they're doing, please let me help you find something where you are, because you don't want that being part of the organization. Like, the airline industry would not be what it is today if it was full of despondent people who don't care about people getting on planes. If it was, we wouldn't be taking off, right? So it's, how do we replicate that outside of the aviation industry? I've said a few things there, but I'd be really curious from you. Now you're on the other side, and it's a good segue into the consulting side. How do you ensure that happens you're not just talking, you're consulting to airports, you're consulting to airlines and businesses within the aviation industry. You're dealing with cultures of companies now that are not about just planes taking off. So what do you think that secret sauce is to get that same common North Star focus to a non-aviation? Surely it's not only unique to that.
Your question is twofold in a way. I think on one hand, you're asking for non-aviation organisations, how do you do it, such as your organisation, James? And then for those that are actually not involved as the airline within the aviation industry, I can tell you now, even if you're involved in, even if you're one of the security people that works in the airport that is frisking down customers, when I take great delight in talking to their frontline employees, when I meet them, I say, why do you choose to work here? I just want to be at the airport. I want to be part of the aviation.
They got the gene.
They got the gene. And so their expression of that is to work in the aviation security, but they actually see themselves, quite rightly, as part of that organism or the orchestra. But I think if we get out of aviation, I think the compass north isn't as clear. And if I maybe just jump into, there's two things I would probably say if I was to hypothetically look at your business or any other non-aviation business. I'd come back to organisational values. Again, this is one of the things, the older I get, the more I understand the importance of organisational values. I often use Apple as an example, right? So if I was to, I've never actually seen the Apple's values, but I reckon I could have a pretty good guess at what they are, right? Would you imagine, James, that the word innovation is probably in there or a similar word? I don't know, but I'm guessing. Right. Would I imagine that something around customer-centric design is in there? Right? Yeah. Something maybe around value or uniqueness. I'm sort of coming from a list, but the values of Apple, there's an Apple store near me. I can sort of sit at home and I can feel the values coming out of that organisation and that store and the people who are wearing those T-shirts. It's just so that their values is just so strong. So Apple has just done a really, really good job from the very beginning, frankly, in just being them, to the point they possibly don't even need to define their values. Yeah. They're just so self-evident. They become intergenerationally folklore and just adopted, right? I think for organisations that don't necessarily have such a compelling case for uniqueness like Apple does, defining the values and bringing them to life is a way to try and achieve that level of common passion and energy and focus in Compass North. The second thing, and this is actually one of the many lessons that I've learned in life, is that not everybody expresses themselves like I do. And as an extrovert, you think, everybody should be like me, and if they're not as passionate about something, or you read everybody through your own behaviour. That's what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah, and so it's taken me a while to figure out that just because somebody's an introvert doesn't mean there's not a lot going on the inside. But I think one of the things I've come to realise is that when I actually have got the organisational values, somebody could actually be living them and holding to them and demonstrating them and making them the decision, their compass north for all their decisions. Arguably is even truer than I am, but they're actually doing it in a way that isn't as obvious. And there is a degree of trust or just read back or not necessarily evaluating everybody through your own behaviour. That everybody has to be, everybody should be free to be their own version of aligning themselves with the organisational values.
I like what you're saying with the values because, much like your own personal values, when someone says to you, so what do you believe, right? Like what's your personal worldview or beliefs? And I read a great book called Love Matters More. And the guy who wrote the book, he says that actually, the ultimate test would be to that question is if after now, Todd, you've known me for a month, we've engaged quite a fair bit. I'd love to know, what do you think I believe? What do you think my values are? Because, and like you just said with Apple, like you don't even know, like they haven't had to tell you, but and we could probably Google it. I'm pretty sure you're on the money with nearly everything you said, right? So they've actually lived it. It's been evident. Like you said, it has to be, the true values have to be felt. And you said it's almost like seeped into you. You've just experienced it. And I think that's a really important piece for us as an organisation going, we can have the best values written up on our wall. We have these big EPIC, our epic values, but who am I going to, the test is, do I talk to my customers and ask them, what do you think? Will they tick those boxes? That's how we truly know whether we're doing that, not whether we sit around a board table and just go, yes, I think we have. I think we're doing a great job. Let's give ourselves a pat on the back.
Yeah. The world's not changed through posters. It's changed through behaviours, isn't it? One of the things I'm really a big fan of is the voice of the customer. It's one of the things that I always, if I'm designing a leadership offsite for any client, in fact, I'm literally doing one at the moment, going to be running one in Perth at the end of the month. First thing I'm doing though is in the design is getting the customer to provide their view to the leadership team in the first half of the first day of the 2 days, because you could be thinking you're doing great work, but it's all irrelevant. It's all about what the customer thinks.
And that would be the same in any industry. Like we do a lot of work, as you know, in K-12. It would be the same thing if you're working with a leadership team there. What's the parents' view of what's going on? What are the students feeling, from an outcome perspective, how they're feeling cared for and taken. So it really matters, regardless of your industry. It's who's the primary stakeholder. How do we actually learn from what they're saying?
And assuming that the customer needs to listen to you and take a bit of a chill pill and, understand, some of the economic rationalities that's driving you or for reasons for your design or whatever it might be, is hubris, if not arrogance. It's you're really signing, I think, yourself up for what is essentially a slippery slope of existence. You have to be customer. One of my other clients actually had a phrase: "Customer first, last, and always." That was actually in the aviation road freight business, that was, Pete would often say that phrase, and I always loved it actually. Customer first, last, and always, because he was at 100% customer focused. Peter actually had a messianic quality with the customer. Actually, Pete had a fleet of trucks that would drive around Australia. If you were to look in the large, semi-trailers, if you were to look in the back of the truck, you would actually see aircraft containers, the same that you see a crew going across the tarmac. And what Pete was doing when, say, United Airlines would maybe fly into Sydney, and United Airlines freight had freight that needed to get to other destinations, rather than break down the freight and send it in smaller aircraft from Sydney, which is possibly on a competitor's aircraft, they'd use Pete and they'd put the container holus bolus in the back of his truck, send it down to, say, Adelaide, where there it would get broken down, put into vans, and then driven the final mile. So he'd found that there was a niche there to do this aviation road freight, believe it or not. I mean, who would have thought, right? But Pete's the nature of road freight is incredibly complex. Arguably, there's too many containers for the right amount of trucks. Something has to stay behind. There's delays on the road. Drivers break down. It's almost more bedeviling than the aviation industry with aviation and the airspace and airports. The roads, all sorts of stuff can happen. But Pete had these messianic qualities, which is coming back to your question. Pete had an ability not to charm or not to charm the customer or even distract them or to try and appease them, but just to explain stuff in such a way that there was compelling truth and transparency. We would use this phrase in Australia, fair income. He was absolutely just genuine, authentic, and transparent and real fair income with the customer about what was wrong and what was right and what he was doing about it. And the customer trust was 100%. And so when the chips were down, Pete would win business as a result of his reputation within those that needed his services, because he was this ability to have that level of relationship just by being fair income and honest. And I call it messianic.
With leading edge management consulting, you've left the industry and you're now in the seat of consultant. What do you think one major thing that keeps coming up that you see that a consultant can see, that you've been able to see through that lens now that you've got a different pair of glasses on, that operators tend not to see? And even your notice of going from one side of the fence to the other, going, whoa, seeing this from the outside now, this is incredible. I've got a different perspective on this and I now see a gap. Look, Have you got any examples of that you're consistently seeing now being on that side?
When I've started the business, I've learned a tremendous amount about running a business as well. The business that I originally sort of defined, I actually was very disciplined, setting out a business plan, had a business coach, put a lot of work into the website, the collateral, etc. It was not just wasn't just a business number and a business name and she'll be right. I actually put a lot of thought into it. And one of the things I discovered was that, and I use the expression that I, thanks to 25 years of being in the industry and the people that I joined with we've all grown up together and now those people are at senior levels, but those people are also no longer necessarily in the same organization that I first met them in. And so my network of people, and I hate that word network because it sounds so salesy and cynically, but I will use it. But my network of people are actually this constellation of relationships that I have. And I like to see myself as an industry Switzerland, because as the consultant, I have the ability, and literally I've actually done this, where I've been within 2 days, I've been in a meeting with Virgin and a meeting with Qantas in their offices, and also a meeting with Rex, three domestic airline competitors. And as a consultant, I have a license for my independence. And what I'm doing is, obviously I'm dealing with different issues, and I'm extremely good at managing my integrity and the integrity on behalf of my customers and managing the separation where it needs to be managed. But also as a consultant that is in industry Switzerland, to answer your question, I find that there is opportunities to stitch solutions together where in a non-competitive way, you can actually come up with common solutions that actually drive good outcomes for the business, recognizing that some of the things that we have in common, whilst sure, we might be competitors, but we actually have common enemies. Our common enemy is cost. Our common enemy is things that are unsafe, right? So if we can focus on the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and using someone like me as a consultant that actually can stitch solutions together that don't compromise the commerciality or the non-competitive nature of some activities, I'm not going there. But a good example would be one of my clients is a training organisation called Aviation Australia, Queensland-based but with a national presence. They do aviation trainings. At the moment, they're focusing a lot on training of engineers, but they also can train, frankly, they can train anybody in vocational training, and they do cabin crew, they do ground operations, and they do some pilots, mostly engineers at this stage. But they too are in a sense an industry Switzerland. And so I'm working with those guys to reach out to my constellation to try and say, hey, you're wishing to run a whatever program, why don't you use these guys to do it? Because they could potentially have participants in the classroom who might be from the competitor, but at the end of the day, it's going to be cost less for everybody, and it's going to be driven by it too, because Aviation Australia is a professional organisation. You're actually going to get it at a professional standard as well. And so I think to answer your question in a roundabout way, as a consultant, I've learned that there's opportunities if you can actually find people that can do that stitching as the industry Switzerland. Yeah. You can actually find ways without breaching non-competitive rules and regulations, but to try and drive out those common enemies of cost and unsafe outcomes.
If you did have the resources, where do you see greater potential for efficiency in organizations? Like, I mean, we are seeing some things being digitized, like flight books now are electronic, right? So you got pilots having their entire flight plan loaded onto an iPad that they then take on. I can imagine their logistics around airlines we've dealt with before have said these are so critical. We have to make sure that they are ready to go at any time so that the plane can take off. In fact, I heard a rumor from one of the airlines we had spoken to in the US that they get fined $250,000 every hour that the airline doesn't take off, if it's their fault. So how mission critical some of these technology pieces are, and you see flight crew using devices, both again below and above the wing, but every area they're using this new technology. Do you feel it's being used to its best ability, or do you think some of this technology is just thrown on them and they're just having to work with it? Because it sounds like it's being so critical now, further things then have to be implemented to make sure that that always happens.
I think when it comes to the cockpit, I think the really careful governance of what any technology that goes into the cockpit is actually thought through.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of controls, a lot of change management, and a lot of quality that is invested in getting that software hardware right. Ironically, that points, however, to the need for making sure that it is now supported, because you've actually now created an environment with individuals. This is not a nice to have, it's probably a mission critical piece of software. Sorry, piece of hardware, let's just say it's an iPad hypothetically, that the crew have, depending on the airline, where there's mission essential information that is a must-fly tool with the right software, with the right version control on it, loaded on, and with the associated, depending on the mission, the right level of power on the battery, right? You get that wrong, and I've always sort of thought of an aircraft departure again, it's a bit like a clock, right? You take one cog out and the clock ceases to be a clock. I mean, it's still got a face on it, but right, you take one cog out, it doesn't become a clock anymore. With an airline departure, you just have to withdraw, one roll or one piece of equipment, vital piece of equipment, and all of a sudden that aeroplane is as stationary as a stationary broken clock, right? And so that points to the essential nature of the hardware. Coming back to your little upstream question, I think the obvious answer is AI. And again, I think AI, a really good friend of mine is now the executive general manager of technology within Qantas, and her remit is to actually drive, amongst other things, but to look at artificial intelligence and where it makes sense to drive it into the airline. I think the challenge is that making sure that we've got AI platforms where we can actually rely on what the intelligence is telling us, and using it in such a way that supports either smart operational decision making, arguably smart calculations for whether it's possibly, to be honest with you, this is already in play, but fuel planning, for example. If I put just the obvious answer of AI aside, and I use AI extensively as a consultant, I'm actually trying to absolutely build my own personal expertise on it, to use it as a tool for me as a consultant to help me add value to my customers. But just putting AI aside, I think the other one would be systems integration. And if I could think about you got all these vertical systems within the airline, ironically, often provided from different vendors, and they're actually using different computer languages. And some of them are so archaic that they're written in green screen, possibly going into some sort of a DOS-based table, if I'm using the right technology language. And other ones are, cutting-edge app-based stuff, right? A lot of the vendors make it quite difficult to even get hold of your own data, even though it's arguably your proprietary information, but you want to get hold of the data. Your ability, the airline is actually sitting on what is actually, in a sense, a subterranean lake of data, and that data is actually in different compartments within that lake. And the ability to be able to plumb it, triangulate it, and extract value to show you where you've got gaps of waste that can be solved and recovered. You've got an ability to justify a business case or define, of the 3 different options that I have, what is the best one and the best way to spend my hypothetical $100,000 in order to solve the problem. What would I be able to see from this incredibly rich data record of the past? If I could actually get into that and analyze it the right way, again, access and probably artificial intelligence helping me there, that would, I think, provide a huge amount of value to the airline that is currently, sure, it's being exploited somewhat, but I do know, at least when I last checked, that the ability to plumb all those systems and to really get them normalized data so that you can actually build and triangulate it and really build a big quality informed picture is just not where it would like, or where it could be in my imagination yet.
And that's where you think you could add a lot of value as a consultant into the industry, is collecting all that data, making sense of it, and then identifying the areas where improvements could be made.
One of the things I've always prided myself on, I'm actually not a code monkey. I'm not going to be the guy that will sit there and do a wonderful dashboard in Power BI and those sort of things. But one of the things I've done from the very, very beginning of my career, and in fact, in a way, I think it's this enjoyment of using my imagination and creativity in solving problems that probably would have made me a very frustrated airline pilot, coming back to the very beginning of this chat, is how do I use technology in such a way that I actually could grab data, turn it into information that actually creates energy in people and organisations. I've always used that phrase, and I've often used technology like that. So it is actually one of those things. Yes, it is one of the ways I help. One of the many ways that I help my clients is actually using that, bring that imagination to bear on getting their data use better and use of technology better.
Well, I came into our conversation today, Todd, very excited to learn everything about the industry. But what I've actually learned is not what I thought I was going to learn, which I'm really excited about, actually. I think I came in with a little sense of cynicism, especially to the large airlines. You hear all the bad press that goes on. And I know that there has been some poor leadership at the top in the aviation industry, but give me an industry where there hasn't been. I could think of many examples where I've made terrible decisions, even my own organisation, the effect that that's had. But I think I've come in with just a bit of a chip on my shoulder thinking it's all about the money that they make and screwing us all over with our rewards programs and our food not being warm enough or our plane leaving 5 minutes late. But you've actually given me a very different, and I hope for our audience, a very different perspective on the industry. It's actually now more inspiring to me than it was before. And I'm still just as excited about airplanes. But I love the way that you've framed it and you've actually highlighted what I believe is the goodness in humanity to all want to work together for the common good. I remember an example of a book I read a while ago, and I'm going to not do it justice, but it was The Starfish and the Spider, one about centralized sort of flat organizations versus someone at the head that you cut the head off. Well, clearly the rest dies. Of a spider, you cut a starfish, you put one of its legs off, it grows back. You cut it in the middle, it becomes two. Like the organization itself works without that one person. And I can't think of a better example than the aviation industry, where you have it all working to some degree. You've got lots of bosses. That has changed my perspective. So I just want to thank you for coming on the show. That has been a real insight to me. I also like the way that you have had a perspective from your consulting business now to actually get people to work together and not against each other if it's going to be beneficial. All right. And again, that's another takeaway for me. It's been a really intriguing conversation. I'm so glad for the relationship we've formed and to learn everything that I have today. And I appreciate you taking the time for us.
Pleasure's been mine.
Thanks so much.